Hello, my name is Johnny Moore. I am the founder of Addiction and Faith video series. This is part two of this series, and today I would like to talk about addiction and bondage. I would like to start off by saying that one of the greatest problems that we're facing in our time is addiction. That's prevalent everywhere. We see the government is putting out a lot of money in terms of helping addiction programs and addiction organizations address the problems. We have a lot of people that are ODing and are dying from addiction today. And yet, addiction is still prevalent in our society. And when I say prevalent, what I'm really saying is that no matter what we've seen to do in terms of money, the problems still persist and have not gone away. They have not decreased in any way, shape, or form. And so we've got to look at addiction in another way because obviously this way is not working. And so we're going to talk today about some theories that I have concerning addiction. One is that addiction is not a disease, addiction is a bondage. There are TV specials that are just prevalent today about drug use. But there's nothing out there in terms of TV series or an organization that I know of that they highlight the people that are being freed from addiction, and the things that are working to alleviate this addiction problem. I have a problem with that because it seems like we've romanticized drug use, but even though we're putting all of this money into it, we're not doing anything effectively to stop the drug use, to prevent the drug use, and to create a better society and a better people in our world. And so I see a lot of these drug programs, and they're all over Drug Inc. and Dope Inc. and all of these different programs, but they're really not doing anything to show where we are doing something to alleviate the problems that we're dealing with. And so today I would like to just start off, first of all, by saying to you and giving you a term for the word addiction that came in 1890. And the word addiction comes from the Latin word addixere. And that word addixere means to delight or surrender oneself to a master. That is important because if your drug of choice, or if your alcohol or whatever your addiction may be, is a master in your life and it's dominating your life and it's controlling your life, then you're almost at the place where you're worshiping it as if it's a god. And that's one of the greatest problems that I find in addiction, is that what addiction really becomes is a false worship of a false god. It's a form of idolatry because we start to worship these things and start to look at these things as if they can bring joy and happiness and meaning to our lives, when in actuality what they're doing on a daily basis is destroying families, destroying children's hopes of their parents ever getting free from addiction. And there's just a lot of chaos that's going on in our society as a result of what's happening with drug use with the people in their lives. And so that's the Latin root word for addiction is addixere, and it means to delete, or it means to delight oneself or surrender oneself to a master. And so we've got to look at these meanings and start to think a little bit about what we're dealing with when we're dealing with addiction. I want to read something to you today that I've accumulated over the years out of one of the books that I had indulged in. It says the trouble arises out of a false notion of a disease. The medical people, along with almost the whole of our society, think that there is only one kind of disease, whereas in fact there are a few diseases. There is not only physical diseases, but also mental diseases and spiritual diseases, which in our case would be spiritual bondage. And they cannot be fixed with the same bag of tools. That's important, because you can't fix something that's physical with a spiritual means, and you can't fix something mental with a physical means, and you can't fix something that's spiritual with a physical or mental means of fixing it. They cannot be all fixed with the same bag of tools. And that's the problem that I see that's arising in the addiction culture, is that we're not thinking enough about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how to alleviate the problems. We're just throwing money at the problems, hoping that a solution would fall in our lap. And that's not going to happen that way. Spiritual diseases must be dealt with spiritually. And this is actually what addiction is. It is a spiritual bondage or a spiritual disease in which has gotten a hold of the person in their spiritual part of their lives. Let me explain to you what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that every human being is made up of three elements. He's a physical being, a mental being, and a spiritual being. That's why you can have something break on your body physically, and you can go to a doctor and he can reset your broken arm or whatever it may be, and it's a physical response to a physical problem. If you have a mental problem, you can go to a psychiatrist or whoever, a psychologist or whoever it may be, and they can deal with the way you're thinking mentally. But what happens when it's a spiritual problem? Where do you go then? Well, the church, it was designed to deal with spiritual problems. And even though at some point it may have gotten away from it to some degree, that is the place where spiritual problems arise from, and that's where they're dealt with. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I want to go on right now and just read some more to you. It says, this is the reason that an addict can get clean from a substance that is in his body and yet still not be free from the so-called disease of addiction, because you can have all of the symptoms of the physical symptoms of the body removed by going through detox, and it may take a little while, but those physical complications will eventually subside. But that doesn't mean that you've dealt with addiction. It means that you've just dealt with this physical complications that arise from addiction. But addiction itself is in the spirit. I hope that you're starting to understand where I'm going with this, because if you don't deal with addiction in the spirit, you can't alleviate addiction in the life of the individual. It has to be something that is dealt with and addressed in their spirit. Let me read on to you. The main potential of the spirit is intelligence, will, and passion. And that is exactly where the addict is essentially sick. His diseased intelligence does not know his own good. And so what he does is he takes a harmful substance in his life, but he doesn't recognize that that harmful substance is indeed harmful and can destroy his life. Then his passion is worn out. And so now He doesn't have a passion for raising his children, for going to work. These things take place through the process, and he starts to lose his passion for life and his passion for hope. He starts losing his dreams, and all these things start to subside as a result of what has happened with the spiritual bondage of addiction. And when he finally realizes that all of these things have taken place in his life, then he tries to use his own will to get out of addiction, but now his will is defective and it doesn't work like it used to, and he can't will himself out of addiction because now his will is defective as his passion and as his intelligence is. The results of this, however, is this. And this is what most of you can identify who's dealing with addiction. It is a loss of control and an inability to stop drinking or drugging. And that's what addiction is. It is an inability to stop drinking or drugging, even if you have years clean. If you have years clean and go back and start all over again, then addiction was never in your body in the first place. It was in your spirit, and you did not address it and deal with it in the right portion of your body. So the physical part of addiction is the unstoppable use of drugs. The spiritual part of addiction is the overpowering thoughts and the desire to use drugs. And however, what leads us into addiction is in the first place is a lack of understanding as to who God is, and we talked about that in the first series, because we have to understand that God does love us, and God has a purpose for us, and God wants to do great and wonderful things in our life. But if you don't know that and you don't understand that, then you feel lost, and then you feel like nobody loves you after a while, and then you start to feel worthless, and you start to feel flawed, and you go through this process. But God has never been a God of process. He doesn't need a process to deliver you or free you from addiction, even though it takes a process for you to get in addiction. And so that's why God is the only answer when it really comes to dealing with addiction, because to deal with addiction, you don't need a process, you need God. And God is the answer that will eliminate and alleviate you from all addiction in your life, because God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. And so if you can't control your life, if you can't control your future, if you can't control your drinking, and you can't control your drugging, then you have to look at yourself and realize that you're in addiction. And now, to alleviate the problems that have now arisen in your life because of addiction, you've got to deal with it spiritually. You will have physical complications. You will even have mental complications. But the problem itself lies in your spirit. And so what we've got to do is we've got to understand that we are responsible then for our addiction because of our free choice or free will to go there in the first place. We've allowed ourselves to enter into a place by drug use and the process of addiction and the deception that came along in that process that told us we were worthless, that told us we were flawed. The things and the ideas that we brought into now are the things that that has to be eliminated in our life for us to be free from addiction. And so, there's a lot that we are going to be talking about when it comes to dealing with addiction spiritually, but we're not talking about 12-step programs. And I want to make that clear to you, because for some reason, every program that addresses the 12-step method thinks that they're dealing with the spiritual elements of addiction. But those 12-step programs, if you think about them, are also process programs. And they're just like the process that it took for you to get into addiction. They're saying there's a process for you to get out of addiction. I'm saying God didn't take me through a process. God delivered me and set me free from addiction. And whoever the Son sets free is free indeed. How did he do that? Well, one, she showed me that I was somebody, that I meant somebody to him and to the world. He took that substance that had me bound and he set me free from that. And in setting me free from that, he set me on a new course in life to do great and wonderful things. But yet I had to go through the transformation of my mind, had to change the way I was thinking about certain things in my life. And those things and those ideas brought me to the place today where now I'm ready to help other people overcome addiction in their life and tell them about the God in whom we serve. So we've got to understand that when we talk about God, he doesn't work like the 12-step programs work. How he works is through faith. He wants us to believe in him. He wants us to believe that he's real. He wants us to believe that he has power that's greater than the power that has us bound in the first place, and that he can set us free and send us and deliver us onto a path that is glorious and meaningful and purposeful in our lives. And so that's the message today. I want you to understand that addiction is not a disease. I don't say that lightly. I say that truthfully. I say that with all the truth in my heart that I can spew out of my mouth right now to you. That addiction is not a disease. It's not a spiritual disease, no matter how many organizations with all of these certificates and all of these degrees tell you it is. It's a spiritual bondage, and you need a spiritual awakening from a spiritual God to set you free from a spiritual bondage. And he's willing to do that. All you got to do is come to him by faith, ask him to come into your life, forgive you of your sins, set you free from the bondage of addiction, and he will come in and do a great and wonderful work in your life. Thank you so much. This has been Addiction and Faith, series part 2. We've been talking about bondage today. I will definitely be piggybacking on a bondage a lot throughout this series. Goodbye now, and I'll talk with you later. Bye.